my father was a good man. That was a sacrifice to show everyone what has been going on in life. And it should give everyone a push that everyone should be together, not against each other.
The deaths of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile by police have ignited protests across the United States. The painful images have produced anger and debate about racial bias. Let's get back to our distinguished panel. Richard, let's look at the role of the president in this debate. President Obama was in Dallas. He attended that memorial for the 5 police officers who were killed there. He made a speech. He talked about racial bias. Let's take a listen to part of what he said.
We also know that centuries of racial discrimination, of slavery and subjugation and Jim Crow, they didn't simply vanish with the end of lawful segregation. They didn't just stop when Dr. King made a speech or the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act were signed. Race relations have improved dramatically in my lifetime. But America, we know that bias remains. We know it. Whether you are black or white or Hispanic or Asian or Native American or of Middle Eastern descent, we have all seen this bigotry in our own lives at some point.
So, Richard, President Obama has come under serious criticism from some quarters on this particular issue. Question is, as the country's first African-American president, as the country's first black president, has he done enough to address racism in this country?
So I think you can't lay this all at the feet of the president, where I disagree with a lot of folks from my community, right? I think what the president has done is him and his wife living in the White House speaks to the change that our nation has made. But at the same time, them living in the White House has also created a stain in this country, and that a lot of folks believe that now that we live in this quote-unquote post-racial society with an African-American president, we don't need to pass any more laws. We don't need to maintain the same protections. We don't need to renew the Voting Rights Act. And that's just critically and fundamentally flawed, right? And I think he's received a lot of criticism from the right for saying that he hasn't supported police officers. But I think in every single statement we've seen this president put out, since we've seen this string of murders that have been on tape, he said that, he believes in law and order. But we still have, as a country, have to answer our contextual bias. And this bias doesn't have, yes, there's bias in Washington, D.C., and there's bias in our nation's capital. But a lot of these biases are happening in city halls and school boards and state legislatures, where they're passing laws that have basically emboldened the police to take the steps that they have taken in a lot of these cities. And there's no accountability for them.
Right. John, one of the things we heard President Obama say in that excerpt we just played is that race relations, he said, have improved dramatically in my lifetime. Do you believe that to be the case?
Well, I think that's definitely true. I think it's also a little bit complicated because if you go back to the 1950s and 60s and look at the criminal justice system, the criminal justice system did not play the same role that it's playing now. So blacks were much less likely to be arrested. The criminal justice system was much smaller. So in that respect, you would say the criminal justice system is harsher on blacks than it was in the 1950s and 60s. On the other hand, if you look at someone going to Harvard and becoming head of the Harvard Law Review, that didn't exist in the 1950s. So we're talking about complex systems. I think the president is trying to walk a line that links people together. And I don't think it's just bias. I think bias is actually too individualistic. You look at Baltimore, a number of the police involved in the killing there were African Americans. So if you put people in a system that's deeply flawed, even people from the target community, you're going to still have bad results happening. It won't be the same. We have to fix the system, not just fix individuals.
Mary, do you think the president is being treated fairly? I mean, his response to some of the criticism is that he is the president of all Americans, not just black Americans. He's taken the high ground as far as that is concerned. But, some of the criticism has come from very prominent people. Cornel West, for one, a very prominent academic and activist. He recently criticized the president for not visiting the families of black men killed in Minnesota and in Baton Rouge in Louisiana. Cornel West said the president doesn't have the backbone to fight for justice. I mean, that is very harsh. Are they valid criticisms?
Well, you can see that the tightrope he has to walk, because at that very speech in Dallas, when he's trying to talk about a dialogue, he was praising police officers and they would applaud. But when he talked about work that they have to do in the communities, many of them were sitting on their hands. And then you do have folks saying, well, you know, you had a pastor in Dallas said he really should be talking in Minnesota and Louisiana. And so in a way, yes, people should criticize him. He's the president of the United States. But you do appreciate that he has one message for all of the audiences. And being an African-American president, he is the pioneer. He is the Jackie Robinson. And so he is going to get a lot of personal pushback that he has to fight every day. And a message coming from him is not going to be taken in the same way as it is anyone else. And people are going to misinterpret it anyway. You've seen from his presidency not only the voting laws that have been brought in, but you see the disrespect, the unprecedented, you know, people yelling, "You lie," the fact that his Supreme Court nominee is being held up when he is the president, and people pretty much saying, you know what? He's kind of not the president. You know, it's almost as though they want to put an asterisk by his name and make him not the president. Given that, he's done, some would say, an Herculean job getting the issues that he has gotten passed through. And as everyone has said, just the image that he is in the White House with the First Lady, Michelle Obama, who's so admired, and two beautiful girls growing up. He has been this picture-perfect person and representative of the United States, and
Right.
he is still getting criticized.
Okay. Richard, let's talk about the role of the media in the United States in covering racism. You work in the media. What role is the media playing here?
Well, I think the media's job is to talk about the facts. And here's what the folks at home need to know. The facts are pretty simple in most of these cases. In this case, it's about the valuation of life. And if you were to take this off of the US dollar, for example, Anon, what we see here happening in the United States at this tipping point where we sit right now, it is very clear that a white life is worth a dollar, a black life might be worth 50 cents, and Hispanic life might be worth the same thing. And that is where this comes from. And I think it is a job of everybody in the media to really work on extrapolating and pulling out the facts in a lot of these cases and asking the hard question. For example, in the Philando Castile case, he was a licensed gun owner, right? And it was checked, and it took 4 or 5 days for the NRA to release a statement indicating that they find something questionable about the fact that a licensed gun owner was killed for carrying a gun in a state where he's allowed to carry a gun, right? And so the job of the media is to do just that, to call out many of these institutions and say, where are you on this? Where you believe in the right to bear arms? Where was Philando's right to bear arms? Was that right lost? Are you guys filing a lawsuit? You guys file a lawsuit every time the president tries to pass a law that would restrict guns. Why are you not filing a lawsuit in the state of Minnesota where this individual's gun right was infringed upon? So I think the job of the media here, more so than anything else, is to pull out the facts and let the folks at home, no matter where they live, know exactly what's important. What are the top lines? And the top lines in all of these cases, we're dealing with a systematic problem in this country that is literally tearing our nation apart because two groups refuse to listen to each other. Right? What the Black Lives Matter movement is calling for is dialogue. How do we make police more accountable? Is it body cameras? Is it more funding? Is it community policing? But beyond just that, at the same time, how do we enrich the African American community? And like we've said, like all the guests have said today, this goes beyond just stopping police brutality.
Right, let me get John's view on this. John, what needs to happen? I mean, as Richard points out, there is now a discussion. Black Lives Matter has made us aware of the problem again. There is a discussion, there's discourse, but what needs to happen next?
Well, a couple of things. I think we're changing as a country, and we need a framework, we need a story, we need a vision that includes all of us. And I want to go back to your earlier question about the president being president for all of us. I completely agree with that. I advocate for something I call targeted universalism. If you have people who are dying of leukemia, and the president says we need to do something about leukemia, that doesn't make him the president less for those of us who don't have leukemia. So when you have populations that are suffering disproportionately, it's appropriate for the president to say, I need to step in and say something about all what's happening in terms of black people in this country. And in his book, before he became president, he talked about that. So advocating for black people doesn't mean you're against the police. It doesn't mean you're against white people. Too often, the media and too many in the media set that up. Are you for the police? Are you for black people? One of the guests talked about the black community, more than any community, needs good policing. It needs less it needs more safety, less policing. It needs people there not as occupying force. And one of the things you do is you give people power to participate in sort of who comes into the community, what they do in their community, how they're evaluated. No one would want a police force that was totally outside their community, that was hostile to the community, that was well armed. That's not democracy. There's nothing radical about that, saying we want police either from our community or a minimum sensitive to our community. So I think that there are a number of things that we can do. It seems to me, for example, we've talked on about some of them, the police should actually, you might think of trainings where the police training involves them going into schools as counselors, as coaches, before they go into the police force. They may take implicit bias tests to sort of understand the deep-seated bias that all of us operate in. They may take training in terms of how they discharge their firearms. They may be evaluated by the community. But the main thing is to really hold on to the notion that there's a story that all of us belong, not just white people, not just police, not just the rich, all of us belong. And the way our society is structured in terms of our schools, in terms of the media. I mean, we just had a big thing with the Academy Awards. You know, now black people can't act. And so how we're represented in the media, how we're represented in sports, how we're represented on the streets matter. And the president is more than just passing policies. He's also representing a story, a hope. And I think he's done a lot, but I think he can do more.
Right.
I think beyond that, it's also creating diversity in the media. It's who you see sitting at the anchor desk. It's who's in the control room. It's who's in editorial making these decisions. A lot of times, and a lot of news networks, you don't see diversity on how you cover the story. And having diversity changes how the story is covered completely.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there.
I would definitely endorse that.
We're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for joining us.